back, everybody, to Sogo Whoa Whoa. It's a new year, new way, and new direction. In this series, we've been talking about the history of, and today we're going to talk about the history of the excavator. Before we get started, if you enjoy this type of content and you're happy with what you've been seeing so far, smash the like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It just helps us to continue on making these videos for this channel. All right, let's get to it. The history of the excavator. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, several different patents for a mechanical digger, otherwise known as an excavator or shovel, were submitted to the U.S. Patent Office. It wasn't until 1835, however, when a then 22-year-old William Otis and an engineer named Charles French brought to life the first ever steam shovel. It was created for the engineering firm Carmichael and Fairbanks for their Boston and Albany railroad contracts. These machines, state-of-the-art at the time, seem archaic by today's standards. They did, however, improve vastly the capability of moving material in 1835. A human being can move roughly 12 cubic yards of material a day. The machine that William Otis and Charles French brought to the world could move 300 cubic yards a day. It could move what 25 men could move. These machines were the first examples of self-powered construction equipment. 4 years later, William Otis released a second version with many improvements on the first. He didn't, however, get to see any of the effects that his machine would have on the world. He died of typhoid fever that same year. 102 of his ideas would go on to build the Panama Canal. 77 built by the Erie Shovel Company, owned by Caterpillar at the time, and the remaining by the Marion Steam Shovel Company. In 1882, Sir W.G. Armstrong and Company of England invented the first hydraulic excavator. He used water instead of hydraulic fluid to pressure the cylinders, but the theory was sound. The original definition of hydraulic, stating operated by water, was in fact truth. This machine is what we would call nowadays a hybrid, as not all functions operated hydraulically. The bucket was still operated with cables and chains. Before this, all excavators or shovels had been operated with cables and chains. In 1884, the first 360-degree shovel was created. It's a feature still prominent today. In 1897, the Kilgore Machine Company of America produced the direct acting excavator, the first all-hydraulic excavator. It used 4 different acting steam cylinders and removed all cables and chains. Safety just saw another improvement for the operators, as cables and chains were often terrible and sometimes fatal pinch points on these machines. It took quite a few more years to see innovations on these machines, but early in the 1930s, diesel engines had formally started replacing steam in just about all aspects, including excavators. The end of the 30s saw the end of steam-powered excavators almost entirely, and tracks had now become mainstay by this point, and were used for construction of roads and quarries, where you will still see these magnificent machines working to this day. Believe it or not, it was not until Domag, now known as Komatsu, released the hydraulic bagger in 1954 did we see for the first time a modern excavator. Diesel powered, fully hydraulic, 360-degree rotation, and on tracks. The B504 was capable of utility and productivity not yet seen in this industry. Reliability on these machines, however, remained a little troublesome for the next few decades. Cable shovels and excavators were still used because of their cheaper and tried and tested technology. It took almost 2 more decades before the machining technology could create the clearances needed to operate high-pressure hydraulics. This gives you the lifting and digging power of the excavator. There are essentially 3 parts to an excavator as we know them: the undercarriage, tracks and final drive, the house, which holds the engine, hydraulic pumps, counterweight, and of course the cab and operator, and finally the arm, which is the boom, stick, and bucket or attachment. Cab placement took some time to hash out between the manufacturers before it finally landed on the now normal left side. The early right side cab machines were this way because on cable shovels, the engine turned in one direction and all the mechanical parts needed to rotate the same way. The early hydraulic machines had all the drive clutches on the left side, but the reduction drivetrain box for moving the machine was located inside the cab on the right side with the operator. This reduction box could have easily been put on the left side because most American manufacturers left the cabs on the right due to their familiarity with the earlier systems. It wasn't until the Japanese excavators, with their better quality and ease of operation, did every manufacturer finally adopt the standard left side cab we see today. Controls were and still are are hotly debated, with the Americans enjoying their SAE or John Deere controls, while pretty much the rest of the world saw ISO, which I had previously mentioned in the skid steer video, which is International Organization of Standardization, or CAD controls, as we call them. Caterpillar chose to go with mostly ISO controls from delivery, while John Deere chose SAE in the early years. Most modern machines come delivered in the ISO configuration, but can still be switched back and forth for operator ease and comfort, thankfully. In the early 1970s, Caterpillar developed and patented their pressure-compensated axial piston pump with torque limiting, which prevented the hydraulic pumps from being overloaded and the machine from stalling when under load. They simply supply power where it is needed and shut it off when it's not. A vast improvement over the older excavators. By the 1980s, cable operation was pretty much extinct. Hydraulic excavators were faster, more efficient, just as reliable, and now on par as far as cost to operate and own. Load sensing hydraulics had also started to be introduced, which was another technological innovation. Electronic controls, or electronic over hydraulic controls, electronic servos operating hydraulic valves, were introduced in the late 1980s as well. Vibration and overall abuse these machines take throughout their life cycle played a big role in electronic controls not being mainstay until the early 2000s. We simply didn't have the technology to make electronics that tough. By the early 2000s, however, electronic controls had become the norm from every manufacturer. This made adding attachments such as twist buckets and tamping devices much easier. With a simple flick of your thumb, you can now control a different function. And speaking of thumbs, although the original patent was first issued in 1965, they were not seen in the industry as a norm until the late 1990s or even the early 2000s. Old ideas are sometimes hard to break, and offering new technologies and additions don't always see the light of day when they are first introduced, unfortunately. And alternatively, it was also in the 1990s when the quick attach, or quick change, or quick hitch, whichever you prefer, for excavators came to be in existence, and they were and are a godsend. Now, instead of hours of beating on potentially seized or worn oblong pins trying to change buckets, you simply release two bolts and knock the wedge out. Curling your wrist up, remove the old bucket, and you simply hook the ears of the other bucket, rolled your excavator wrist, drove the new wedge in, and tighten the bolts. If you did this a lot, you could complete this whole process in under 5 minutes. Now, hydraulic rams operate the wedge, and the operator doesn't even need to leave the comfort of their cab. The modern excavator is a joy to operate compared to those of the days of past. Air conditioning, heated seats, large LCD screens with all vital information, backup cameras, fully adjustable hydraulic functions, and power are but just a few of the modern conveniences. Not to mention super quiet cabs, Bluetooth, and satellite radio. Excavators also range in size from a little over 1,000 pounds to over 180,000 pounds. They are incredible machines, and I am extremely excited to see where we go from here. If you've been thinking about wanting to start operating heavy equipment, the excavator is a great place to start. Once you're comfortable and more experienced, you'll be able to find work pretty much anywhere by knowing how to operate one of these machines. Thank you so much for watching to this point. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, as it helps us to continue making more content like this. So use the excavator, smash that like button, and we'll see you on the next one.